Well, hello, folks. Welcome to The Sacred Speaks. My name is John Price. I'm your host, and this is exciting. This person I'm introducing today, Dr. Jeffrey Kripal, is the most frequent participant of The Sacred Speaks. This is his 5th episode. Thank you so much, Jeff, for arranging the time. I am honored. I'm full of adoration, and I deeply appreciate Jeff's work and who he is as a person, how he shows up in the world. And if you don't know him, you will soon understand why. Here's his bio. Jeffrey J. Kripal holds the J. Newton Rayzor Chair in Philosophy and Religious Thought at Rice University, where he served as the Associate Dean of the School of Humanities from 2019 to 2023, chaired the Department of Religion for 8 years, and also helped create the GEM program, a doctoral concentration in the study of Gnosticism, esotericism, and mysticism that is the largest program of its kind in the world. He presently helps direct the Center for Theory and Research at Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, where he served as chair of the board from 2015 to 2020. Jeff is the author or co-author of 13 books, 9 of which are with the University of Chicago Press. He also served as the editor-in-chief of the Macmillan Handbook series on religion, 10 volumes from 2015 to 2016. He specializes in the study of extreme religious states and the revisioning of a new comparativism, particularly as both involve putting the impossible back on the academic table again. Fantastic. He is presently working on a 3-volume study of paranormal currents in the history of religions and the sciences for the University of Chicago Press, collectively entitled The Superstory. Again, thank you, Jeff, for giving your time, so much of it, to The Sacred Speaks. And also just how expanded my own thinking is because of what you've contributed to the world. Many thanks. I'm always excited to talk to Jeff. So just a couple of housekeeping details. Jeff and I talk about this. He will be at Esalen in December, and so will I. So if you're interested, go check out Esalen. It is the first couple weeks of December. Jeff will be there the weekend of I think it's the 5th to the 8th. And I will be there the 8th to the 12th, or maybe the 4th to the 7th for him. So check out the workshop. It's a 5-day workshop at Esalen that I'm facilitating, and we're exploring Jung, psychedelics, and integration. This is going to be exciting. I got pretty stoked to do this with Esalen, and so come on out. Check us out and come on out. Other things to check out, go to my website, sign up on the newsletter. If you have not, drjohnwprice.com, drjohnwprice.com. There's a lot of John Prices in the world. So I've got to have some signifiers there. And then also a group that I'm running that's been up and going, and we are rocking and rolling through the first 4 groups. You can join at any time. It's a year-long process, but I'll be running it for about 3 years, so you can jump in at any point for the year. What we're doing is exploring various emotional states that can sometimes take us over and have their way with us. So there's an opportunity to reframe, not from a pathological perspective, but how to be with various emotions and how to maybe unlock. Of course, they're difficult to experience, and certainly the context can be very difficult, but the ways we make sense of them and how we don't resist them, as opposed to what we're offering, is an opportunity to explore them, connect with them, dialogue with them, and understand them from a deeper level. The group is called The Open Gate. Check it out online. It is a fantastic community, and we are doing well. There's also a very cool process of exploring spiritual practice, which is a challenge, 21-day journaling opportunity that it will be included, I believe. So go to the website, sign up. Other than that, check out the Center for Healing Arts and Sciences at thecenterforhas.com. It's a wellness space my wife and I started many, many years ago. Always the theme music is Clouds from Modern Nations. And other than that, I want to leave it there and bring you Jeff. Thanks for being here.
Controls your dreams, persuades your thoughts.
Welcome back to The Sacred Speaks.
Thank you.
Today's guest is someone who, in a very real way, bookends my own work, as I just said. The very first conversation of this project was with you, Jeff, and now finishing. So Jeff is the J. Newton Rayzor Professor of Philosophy and Religious Thought at Rice University. where he spent decades exploring what most of us were never taught to think about: the paranormal, the impossible, the experiences that exceed our socialized egos and containers of organized religion. His latest book, How to Think Impossibly, about souls, UFOs, time, belief, and everything else, is another invitation into that liminal territory. It's both scholarship and initiation, a reminder that the essence that fills all the containers of religion is stranger, wilder, and more numinous than any dogma. For me, Jeff's work is not just about the paranormal, it's about healing horizon of human imagination. It pushes me, and I hope it pushes us, to notice the exotic exchanges of reality, those risky, thrilling, and unsettling places where mystery lives. Jeff, thank you for being here. I'm excited to dig in.
Yeah. No, I'm always happy to
It's very formal. That was a very formal beginning for our fun dialogue that we've had for so many years.
you know, I can tell right away when someone's read the book, and you've read the book,
I've
so
read all your books, Jeff.
yeah,
Yeah, it's true. And Jeff, I'll get into this later, but I have one of the coolest things I think about reading your books is weird shit starts to happen to me when I read your books.
yeah,
I and so that's one of the things I want to talk about. I'll give this story later about an experience that I imagined as I was reading. But first, let's kind of let the reader in on what you're about. So the of course, the very first conversation you and I had was about comparing religion, and your book, incredible textbook comparing religions that has really altered the course of a lot of my endeavors, and thank you on and on for that.
yeah.
So as I return, I'm wondering about kind of the origin point of this book. If we could just talk about what thinking impossibly means to you, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I wrote a book before we're always talking about books. I wrote a book before this called The Superhumanities.
It was great. Check my interview with Jeff on the superhumanities.
Yeah, yeah, and the superhumanities in a nutshell are what people think of as the humanities, so the study of literature and philosophy and history, but with an emphasis on altered states.
Mhm.
And it really is trying to make this argument that the origin of human thought lies in altered states. It's not people thinking up this shit. It's not, you don't think your way to something. You're inspired. It comes out of nowhere, as they say, you know? And so what this book is about, How to Think Impossibly, basically my editor said to me, "Okay, Jeff, how do we do it? How do we do the superhumanities?" And I was like, "Wow, that's a good question." Of course,
I
I
don't
don't know
know.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know, but here's what I think it is. And so Kyle's his name, Kyle. And in this book, basically thinking impossibly means don't reduce these experiences, don't explain them away in terms of your system, whether that worldview is secular and scientific or whether it's religious. That religion doesn't really work, but neither does science. Science doesn't work either. And of course, what religion does is it demonizes these states, and what science does is it dismisses them, calls them hallucinations or coincidences or some
Mm.
other lame ass explanation. So I don't like demons, and I don't like hallucinations. I think they're cop outs,
Mhm.
John. And when I listen to people's experiences that are in all through this book, I hear suffering, and I hear an impulse to heal, and I hear the experience itself wanting to talk and tell a story. And so the basis of this book is, well, let's listen. Let's hear those stories. Let's think with, and I use a hyphen, think with. Let's think with these experiencers and create new theory and new thought and new culture out of them. Because I think that's what they're about ultimately. But they can only be about that if we don't explain them in terms of some other system.
Yeah, and I guess there one of the notes that you make in the book, which is fascinating, is the particular dimensions of each unique experience, but also the universal aspects of those experiences. And so, kind of speaking a little bit, because we're going to expand, kind of using your book as a diving board, actually. But just to contextualize this for the listener a bit, Would you talk a bit about some of the stories and encounters that you had through talking with some of these folks
Oh,
or
you
reading them, you know?
No, I mean, I know these people. I mean, there are very few people in the text that I don't know, and haven't sat down with and listened to. So I'm not sure what your question is, John. Do you wanna hear some stories?
I
Is
do, I do. I was imagining the listener who's like me sometimes, like, "Okay, like what?" 'Cause you make the great point at the end of the book saying
Oh, I
not
see.
everybody has these experiences.
No, they don't. They
And
don't.
so
I don't,
yeah,
by the
I'm with you. I'm an erotic traveler of the
Yeah.
an erotic and neurotic traveler into these territories.
Okay, well, I'll just tell you 4 very quick stories that are sort of punctured throughout the book. The book begins with Zora Neale Hurston, who is a really famous, well-known African American author, and she wrote a memoir called Dust Tracks on a Road, and it begins with her as a little girl she's 7, and she's on a porch in Florida, and she sees very clearly 12 scenes from her future life, and she then organizes much of the memoir around these 12 scenes, and that is not a literary device, it's these things actually happened to her. I mean, she really had these precognitive visions, and then she would dream about these states consistently throughout her life until, of course, they happened, and
Mm,
then she wouldn't dream of them anymore. She wouldn't think because they played out. There's also an experience, I tell this story of Stuart Davis has told this story of him meeting an 8-foot mantis entity, and all of the UFO and little mantis experiences around it, including all of his film work, his contemporary film work, and so, and Stewart is adamant that those things actually happen. He doesn't know what they mean, he knows they're absurd, but there they are. Karen Austin is in the chapter as well. Karen is a really close friend and colleague of mine, and she had a mechanical AI-like alien bug on her chest when she was a young woman. She had an abduction experience, and she was one of John Mack's featured experiencers.
mm,
John Allison, who's a present doctoral student of mine, he has a story in the book, which most people go to, by the way, of him visiting himself from the future.
mhm.
And really right before years of physical suffering and a kind of visiting himself from the future to tell himself that it'll be okay. He'll get through it. So those are just 4. Look, I think we're sitting in an ocean of these. I think there are actually millions, if not billions of these right now, and that we're surrounded by them, but we don't think of them and we shove them away, and what the book is trying to say is, "Stop that. Don't do that. Don't shove them away."
Okay, let me offer an association here because I've been writing a lot about something I call the sacred refusal. And from a
Uh-huh.
psychotherapeutic orientation, what and Jung wrote a lot about this in an essay on adaptation. We have these adaptations to the environment in which we grow up, where it's primarily about navigating, survival,
Yeah.
connecting, where to give and receive love. And so over the course of our development, we establish those adaptations as the real. I mean, this is and we perpetuate that. And at some point in our life, we realize, "Oh, that's not reality. That was just my adaptation to a particular container." And what, Jung would call the second half of life orientation is really looking at kind of putting away those early adaptations in service to something grander, something more authentic and more genuine. It's easy to imagine on some level, for me at least, that dynamic happens collectively as well, where we have these orientations and worldviews that hijack us from being able to even be open to have the receptivity for these experiences, to believe them as real. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. No, we
Yeah.
do. We do
And
that.
so what hijacks us?
Well, again, you mentioned adaptation and sort of psychotherapeutic goals. I think those are what hijack us, frankly. Um, I I'm not of the opinion that these things are always good for us. They're not psychotherapeutic
Yeah, yeah.
always, and I think the notion of being whole or healing or wanting to be better, I mean, it's kinda boring, John. It's
Mhm,
it's it's a return to normalcy, and it's a return to the social contract, and
mhm, mhm.
I think the social contract is, in fact, the problem, and I think what these experiences are doing is it's saying, "Look, this is the problem. Your very conception of reality
Mm.
is what's making you sick, is what's creating this gigantic mantis in the room or this bug or whatever it is. There's a problem. There's a big problem with the story that you're telling, so let's tell a different story." So there's what I'm trying to say something paradoxical. There is a healing impulse in them.
Yeah.
I I really wanna emphasize that, but it works through taking apart the story that the culture has or that the person has, and the person, by the way, is, of course, just a product of the culture.
Mhm.
You and I are speaking in English right now. Well, we didn't invent English. That was we were socialized into that worldview, into that language as children, and that gives us certain things that are very valuable, but it also takes away other things. And I think these experiences are about these other things coming in and wanting to be acknowledged as well.
God, it's so exciting.
And that's why they're absurd, by the way, I think sometimes is because they're trying to speak in a way that doesn't make any sense in our English or in any human language.
I wanna plant the seed of the word you use there, they are trying to speak, and we'll return to that. But for now, what impossible or impossibilities and experiences first set you on this path? I mean, you're you are in the weird and the exotic and the wild.
Well, first of all, I think religion itself is weird and exotic and wild. I think it's basically people being weird,
Mhm.
and and we normalize it, but religious beliefs are nutty, John. If you think for 2 seconds about virtually any religious belief, it's, like, completely crazy, but it becomes normalized, and we think it's not. We think, "Okay," but it is. It's nutty, and I I had a professor, he used to say that all religious beliefs are unbelievable,
Mm,
and what he meant by that is this is Yoan Kulianu. He meant that, of course, you could believe it if you're inside that religion, but if you're outside of it, it's like, "That's nutty. That's crazy." So there was an
mhm,
inside outside to this.
mhm,
What I think religion is it's a kind of legitimate form of science fiction. It's these
mm,
alt states that are showing up to people, and they're speaking in terms of story, and they wanna be ritualized, and they wanna be turned into architecture and all kinds of things, and so human beings have done that, and I think done that really well. I think our ancestors turned these altered states into religions. And so there's something incredibly positive about religion that it has this sort of vertical dimension to it. It affirms these altered states, but when it becomes a social contract, it starts to exclude
mm,
people and it
mhm.
becomes bad. And so I want to be very critical of that exclusion, but I want to be very affirming and positive about that verticality. If that and that's where I think the paradox comes in and where maybe what you're hearing is I wanna be really affirming of these altered states, but I wanna be really critical of these of their religious messages that get solidified or settle in after many generations.
It's after a really powerful experience that I had once, my dear friend Mark Airy, who is a translator of Greek and has translated the Book of John and the Book of Revelations. I kept on working over this idea of forgetting, and he said actually the term for truth in Greek is aletheia, and part of it is about not forgetting. And because as you're talking, I'm realizing like, well, even the most wild experience over time can its intensity can become stale, and we can forget if we don't do certain things so that we don't forget.
Well, maybe forgetting is is healthy. I mean, I I mean, look, you're a psychotherapist too, and the unconscious is a good thing. You don't want to know a lot of things.
Jung said this, it was really great. We've romanticized the unconscious in a lot of ways, which is a concern. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't it's good to forget. So to me, I mean, this is a mystery. I don't mean that. I hate that word, by the way. Why do we fear psi so? You know,
Mhm,
to speak bluntly, why do we fear our own superpowers? Because we do. We really do. And we see that fear in all kinds of academic and cultural and religious bannings. We press it down or we demonize it or we do all kinds of things to it. So I think we have to explain why we're so afraid of this bigger self or this bigger nature.
mhm,
And I don't wanna suggest that that's wrong, you know, again, maybe we should be afraid, maybe it's okay to dismiss or to censor until it's not, and the people who tell me these stories, they generally don't talk about them, sometimes for decades, even to their spouses. And that then creates suffering.
mhm.
That secrecy is not good. And so when they start to tell the story, there's a kind of healing, there's a kind of process that kicks in. But again, as I think I've told you, I always know that the first story they tell me isn't the real story.
Well, you sound like a psychotherapist now.
Yeah, it's just not. It's not. It's a part of the story, but it's not. It's weirder than that. It's stranger, and it just gets stranger and stranger and weirder and weirder.
It's a little tester.
Yeah, it
How you
never
gonna do this?
yeah, it as I often say, it never makes any sense, but it does make sense in the sense of the individual trying to heal itself, trying to fit into this bigger story. I think there is some sensibility or meaning there.
Mhm. Mhm, mhm.
But thinking impossibly implies that we actually should think about these things and that there is meaning in these stories, right? I mean, if they're trying to communicate with us, and they are very often, what are they communicating and why aren't we listening?
Mhm.
I'm like, just listen for God's sake. And by the way, they often speak, these experiences often speak in the language of whatever the person speaks. So there's clearly a translation process going on. There's clearly a linguistic thing going on. And I find that fascinating. I find that I mean, Spanish speaking people don't hear English, by the way.
Mhm.
And English speaking people don't hear German or Italian, or Hindi or Chinese. The experiences speak to the person in whatever language is relevant.
Well, it brings up a conversation I had with Tanya Luhrmann years ago, and one of my favorite things that she said was when she was writing her book When God Talks Back,
Yeah,
and said, I lived with these evangelical Christians, and these are folks that like make God a cup of tea and have conversations with God in the morning. And she said, weird stuff happened. It was weird. And she said, when I was doing my doctoral work at Oxford, I lived with or I wasn't, I think she lived with, but she was with a coven of witches for
yeah,
about 2 years. And
yeah.
she said, weird shit happened. And how do you square that? Like, what?
Well, again, of course weird shit happens, but here's the thing, and Tanya would be eloquent about this. The weird shit that happened with the Coven of Witches in England was different than the weird shit that happened with the evangelicals in California. So you have to develop some model of the weird shit that can adjust itself to whatever cultural context it is.
Yeah.
And the problem again with religion is the evangelicals think it's God speaking English, or I don't know, they think he speaks King James English or something. I don't know what they think, and the witches think that the nature spirits
Yes.
speak whatever, British with a British accent, or I'm like, "Come on." I mean, or the Muslims think God speaks Arabic, or the Jews think God speaks Hebrew, or whatever. I'm just like, "No, that's not right. God does no." So, God still speaks.
Mhm.
Whether it's King James English or Arabic or Hebrew. So you have to this gets back to the comparative religion question. You have to develop some model in which you can appreciate the cultural context, the linguistic context, but also look at these bigger patterns that are clearly happening. I mean, Tanya, you used the phrase, or Tanya used it, weird shit.
I think that was me. I don't
Okay,
know if
that
she
was
said
you. That was you, John.
that.
Okay, but it happens everywhere.
Yeah.
It's truly universal. It is a global constant. So,
Yeah, wow.
what does that mean?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, so the thought you and I've talked about this before, where you've made a comment at one point about, when you have one worldview that explodes, you go, "Oh, okay, like that's terrifying," and then you have a second worldview that explodes. You're like, "Okay, wait a second, something's happening here." And so, the purpose of a worldview, I think, is extremely valuable, and
Yeah,
I'd love for
I
you
do
to critique
too.
that. And yet, we also I certainly get excited, scared, like the mysterium tremendum is something that comes to mind, like scared and excited about losing one's worldview. So obviously we need one. We need one because that's a lens that we'll have regardless of the, dissolving of the worldview. But you're saying there's a kind of porousness or a flexibility
Well,
to the various
y
worldviews.
I mean, the saying at Esalen, and you know it well, is "We hold our dogmas lightly."
Yeah.
And I happen to think that's correct. And when I teach in a classroom at Rice, it's not that I don't want the students to have a worldview. Of course they need a worldview. Of course we all need a worldview. It's how you hold that worldview, John, that matters.
Hmm.
And if you hold it with humor and reflexivity and a kind of self-criticism, it is healthy, and I think we can get along. But if you hold it in a rigid, exclusive way, oh boy, we're in trouble. As I often point out, if say if you're running a city, say if you're the mayor of Houston, well, it works really well if the fundamentalist church down the street has high thick walls, and they have the truth and no one else does. It works really well if you're in that church, if you're in
Hmm.
that community. It works really badly if you're the mayor of Houston. You don't like or you don't want that exclusivistic
Hmm.
worldview because it makes really bad citizens, right? Of the city. The city is
Yeah.
a pluralistic place, and so what I'm trying to suggest is, look, we live in a pluralistic village, whether we recognize it or not. But we do. It's called the world. It's called the globe. And our politics and our ethics and our psychologies, they flow from it. They flow from these very things that we're talking about. This is not little tangential issues
Hmm.
or the very core of people.
To me, to me that is like it's funny that you said you're referencing Esalen because to me that is aletheia. Remember that your worldview can calcify and can harden, and it can become fixed. And if you don't recall or return to this kind of open or more expansive or more porous orientation, then you too can be afflicted by the hardening of a worldview that will eventually have to explode.
Well, or not.
Yeah, or not, or stay there
You
until
might
you
you
die.
might you might spend the rest of your life thinking you're right, thinking
Yeah, yeah.
community's right. They're not, by the way,
Mhm,
but you might die thinking that. And the reason I love science is because it works on these global, really cosmic principles.
mhm, mhm.
The laws of physics are the same on planet Earth as they are, a billion light years away.
Right.
And wow, that's that's amazing. That's whoa. And something like say biological evolution, I don't care whether you believe it or not, it happened. So there are truths to the universe that aren't dependent on your particular worldview. And that's what I'm trying to push at, or that's what I'm trying I think that these impossible experiences, they're not just about weird shit or subjects or psychology, they actually tell us something about the structure of space and time. I think there's a hook, there's a hook outside the human subject that is really worth thinking about as well. And just give you a good example, then I'll shut up.
Yeah. No, go, no, go.
Take Zora's precognitions on the porch when she was 7. Or take John's visiting himself from the future, which happened, a decade ago or so. Well, those you can't have those experiences if the future hasn't already happened.
Mhm.
They don't make any sense. They're not possible. And this is what I mean by the impossible. It's something that incurs or intervenes in your worldview that you think is impossible, but it's obviously not because it just happened. So what does that mean about reality or about space and time? Well, it suggests that it suggests this or it suggests that. Or take all the psychedelic experiences or Stewart's, praying mantis. It suggests that we're surrounded by entities, by living beings. It suggests a whole ecology of living beings that intervene in human life pretty consistently. Well, what does that mean? So
It's stuck out 'cause I've heard a number of ayahuasca
yeah.
experiences where a mantis would be performing surgery and extracting,
Why is it a mantis? I mean, listen, it's a lot, it's a lot. I mean, you see a lot of praying man I mean, I see a lot of praying mantises in people's encounters,
that was
and,
my experience reading your book. There was a mantis related experience.
oh
Yeah.
my god, they're freaking everywhere.
Yeah.
So and it doesn't seem to be localized, it doesn't seem to be dependent on
Mhm.
a particular culture, so, again, why is that, you know?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why I loved comparing religions so much is because and your whole entire comparative orientation is saying, okay, we have all these structures that exist and what are how can we compare them, number one, but also what are the universals that exist in those structures and how do we understand the kind of forces and powers that fill them? And of course, one of the universals is that we have a worldview, that we have certain belief systems that are interwoven with that worldview and that when we experience something contrary to that worldview, we get in a state of anxiety or fear, and it challenges our reality, not the reality, but our reality. And what I love about what you're saying is that it reveals elements of, I dare say, the reality that's beyond my comprehension, but it touches into that. And I think that's what's so potent about what you talk about.
So the other way to put that, John, is these experiences are not just I'm gonna speak philosophically here. They're not just epistemological,
Hmm.
so ontological. They're
Hmm.
not just about subjective states of knowledge, they're about reality as such.
Yes. Yeah. Wow.
But reality as such, when it appears to a human being, appears as weird shit. And so we have to
Yeah.
take that weird shit as the medium of
Yeah.
how reality is see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's not that
Huh.
I don't want to ignore the mantis or the bug or the way that the reality shows up. I want to emphasize the absurdity of it, the weirdness of it, because I think that's part of its message.
Go into that a little bit because I got a couple questions there, but what do you mean?
So why when people have these experiences, why does it so violate our rationality or our senses? And one reason that you could suggest reasonably is that it's not about our senses. What if our senses have evolved or have adapted to this little sliver of reality so that we can basically kill things and eat them and reproduce and pass on our genetic material? But that doesn't mean that's what's really there.
Mhm.
We have adapted for evolutionary reasons, not for ontological reasons, and so,
Mhm. Mhm.
like, evolution hid it from our eyes, we
Mhm.
don't presume that what you see is what's there.
So, to me, you treated this a bit, Jung certainly does, the difference between sign and symbol. Is that getting close to what you're talking about?
Well, no, I know that conversation, but no, it's weirder than that. It's like all of science is basically the senses
Yeah.
and mathematics as well. But what is hardly ever talked about is this weird correspondence between the numbers and reality. Why is there that correspondence to begin with? Why does just numbers we make up in our head correspond to the moon, for example? What? How that is really weird, John, or much less back to the Big Bang. Come on.
Yeah.
Something is really going on there. And when I hear, like, physicists talk about, say, temporality and space-time, we can't imagine that, by the way. There's no way that our brains can think and or imagine in 4 dimensions. We can try, but you're not gonna do it.
Mhm.
Imagine in 3 dimensions because that's how we've adapted and that's how the human mind or
Mhm.
brain works. So, but maybe reality is not it does not follow those 3 dimensions of the human brain. Maybe it's multidimensional in a way that we can't imagine. That's what I'm trying to say.
Mhm. Mhm.
Can't you can't think this because you can't think it.
Yeah.
And it's it's absurd because you can't think it. You literally can't think it. And I don't mean that like, "Oh, someday you'll think it, just do enough science and do enough you'll eventually get" No! Oh, no, 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 no. No, sorry, it's not gonna happen. You're never gonna get a sensible, rational model because that's the issue, that's the problem itself.
So by science, and this idea of senses, you're talking about what can be observable and what is subject to our capacity to image it and replicate it and verify it and observe it and measure it.
Yeah, and what I love about mathematics is that they're coming up with stuff that you can't imagine. You can't think it. Like, okay, now we're getting somewhere. We're on the right road at least.
Well, maybe this is a bad question, but like, given your adaptations to the fact that you've been working in circles of the paranormal, you've been talking to people about UFOs and near-death experiences and apparitions and psychedelic experiences and spiritual and religious events. What are you finding mind blowing? I mean, have you is it like living in the mountains and eventually you're like, "Oh, the mountain's there, whatever, I'm gonna, like, spit my gum on the sidewalk and be fine." What blows your mind?
Well, first of all, I feel very lonely,
Mm,
but I think a lot of people are lonely.
mhm,
I don't think I'm alone in my
mhm,
loneliness. I think most things that people think are frankly fucked.
mhm.
And I think we imagine reality in really wrong ways. And so we get social systems that are really messed up. And I think a lot of our problems, particularly around ecological collapse, are a result of us not being aligned with reality.
Mhm,
That's
mhm.
why I keep pushing this sense of the impossible as an alignment with reality and not just a subjective, altered, or psychological state. I don't I of course, it is that, but I think it also is about being aligned with a greater reality.
That's actually how I define suffering. I think your misalignment, it brings out a neurotic kind of suffering, and here we are.
And a suffering's a kind of wisdom, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Kind of it's a kind of honest response to it. I also, John, I mean, this is gonna I don't want this to sound narcissistic, but I don't actually care about myself. In other words, I don't have I don't have these experiences of a mantis or of a 4th dimension or of myself visiting myself from the future, but I really don't care,
Yeah.
and it's not because I don't care, it's because I don't think Jeff matters.
Mhm.
Really
Totally
don't.
get that.
I guess I'm very Buddhist in that. I really think that the focus on the atomic individual or the state of the ego is a mistake. And
Mhm.
I think humor and I think reflexivity, I think a lot of philosophy, like say take Nietzsche as an example or take Buddhism as an example, is precisely this deconstruction of this notion of self or the atomic individual. So you're asking me this question about what blows my mind, and what I'm trying to say is I don't really care about my mind. It if that sounds okay.
No. G
In other words, I live in a world that is constantly blown,
Mhm.
but I'm so used to that I'm deeply suspicious of anybody who comes to me with a very clear worldview.
Mm.
Or certain worry me. People who are humorous or uncertain or ambiguous delight me. I think they're on it. So, I don't know, that's a kind of roundabout way to your
Mhm.
question,
Mhm.
but it's honest, it's very honest. What pushes me if I can or what blows my mind, as it were, or what pushes me further is the utter physicality of some of these experiences.
Mm.
People are
Mhm.
not they are not describing an apparition, they are describing a physical event in the environment. To me, that is that is awe-inspiring. I call this radar and revelation, that there's something very physical happening, the pilot sees something, but there's also an apocalypse, there's an uncovering, there's a revelation of the real that's going on as well, and those 2 things are happening at the same time. Do we understand that? No. We tend to split the mental and the material. The material world has its own laws and does its own things, and there are causes and physics and blah, 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 and the mental world is just it's all schlock. It's psychology, it's mental, it's not really real. Well, that collapses in these moments.
Mm.
Sometimes the mind has an effect on physical reality, or something very physical appears and clearly has a mental or spiritual component, and so I'm shocked by that. And a simple example here is synchronicity.
Mhm.
Synchronicity doesn't make any sense because we again split the mind and material reality, but in synchronicity they're working together. They're very obviously working together. So what is going on? Why is that? And I think this is precisely how intelligence would manifest in the world. It would manifest through these collapses of mentality and materiality.
Mhm. There's kind of a moral, I use that word loosely, in that the judge is gone. The judge that in that moment of real or not, good or bad, friend or foe, that goes away, and there's just a unity and an acceptance, a presence, and
Let me complicate that. I mean, so
nice.
I'm with you. The judge goes away, but like, let's take abduction experiences. They're called abductions for a reason.
Mm.
Our moral notions of agency and individualism and consensus don't work here. Something is possessing or overtaking or doing stuff to these human beings. And if you talk to the human beings, it is terrifying and it is invasive, but it also morphs into this transformation, redemptive kind of quality sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's just freaking terrifying and it's destructive, but sometimes it's not. And so what I'm trying to say is it's complicated. And, Kim Ingalls is somebody who she's a philosopher. She does ethics and phenomenology, and she looks at abduction experiences, and she insists that there's a kind of hyperdimensional ethics here, as she calls it. It's not it's not some simple individualist ethics. And I guess this is where I get critical of a lot of psychology is it operates from this assumption that the person is a true individual and is in control and needs to integrate these experiences into some culturally defined worldview. Well,
Mm.
maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's about blowing up that worldview so that we can have another one. And maybe that worldview doesn't exist yet. Maybe it's our descendants who will benefit from that bigger world. Maybe we won't.
Well,
Maybe we'll
this brings up something really sorry to interrupt, but it brings up a really interesting thing about healing and psychotherapy and where my mind goes when you say that.
yeah.
Because I immediately move into, okay, in the same way that somebody, no matter what, has what we call post-traumatic stress, and there is a way to go about nourishing that individual's worldview to begin to incorporate and shift their relationship to what was overwhelming, and that they can heal, and in some way feel what post-traumatic growth feels like. And so I wonder for folks that have a destabilizing worldview, but this is me. I want you to even check me on this because I end up doing my worldview is one that I certainly think that there is redemption. I have a redemptive worldview.
Yeah, so do I, actually.
I-
I think reality is ultimately good.
yeah. Okay. So then that as healer, as healed healer healing, all of us doing our work on dissolving, shattering worldview, then to become a fuller expression of who we are with more in line with the nature of our current reality. So you do think that at least that there are redemptive elements of this. What might get stuck is somebody's if they shut off or if they don't share it or if they don't work with it or
Well, so yes, I mean, ultimately, I see this as good, but I wanna stress ultimately, it might be really bad
yeah.
for some of us, particularly people who wanna integrate into a worldview that's collapsing.
Well, in the same, I mean, I did a talk last night for this community, Gen Now, and they're young professionals that work for the American Cancer Society. And of course, we're covered up. I mean, I asked the community, we're sitting maybe 20, 30 people in a room. I say, why are you all here? And of course, everybody's got a personal story about self or somebody very close to them affected by cancer. And they're doing something very generative, very
Yeah, as they should.
connected. So that their worldview has shifted as a result of some horrendous trauma.
So let me put it this way. I don't it won't address the cancer workers directly, but I'm thinking of Whitley Strieber here,
Uh-huh.
friend of mine and a really well-known writer on abductions. And at one point, he says to his abductors, "You have no right." And they say, "Yeah, we do have a right." And okay, so that's a moment that I think we should think about.
Mm,
And let me put it this way. I take my furry friend to the veterinarian all the time, and I completely violate her consensus. But I do it for her own good,
mhm,
but she doesn't know that. And if let me just give an if. If these visitors or these others are us from the future, they do have a right to intervene in their own past. Why wouldn't they? And if we're screwing up the environment or about to blow up the planet, of course they're going to intervene. And of course they're going to insert their wills on us. I would. I, listen, I would do that, John.
I would do that for you, Jeff. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, come on. Stop it. Just stop it. And so I think this concept of consensus or will I think it's very
Mm,
tricky. And it presumes a kind of linear causality. It presumes that the future hasn't happened yet and only the past has. It presumes that we're individuals and that we have rights, as we say. But these are all, as we know, these are all historical conventions that have, been produced over lots of texts and lots of societies. So that's more radical than I'm trying to get at your question.
mhm,
That maybe that doesn't land,
mm,
you know? And I'm like, "Okay, it doesn't land then, but it still might be true."
mhm. Well,
I
you've brought into our conversation something interesting, this idea that first that they're the other, Like, this is part of that thread I wanted to pick up on earlier, that there is an other, and I see your words written on the page, and it might be us.
Yeah,
And so let's unpack that idea a little bit.
okay. Yeah, I think that is the one of the fundamental questions, because even if it's an other, even if it's, as they say today, it's a non-human
Mhm,
that is interacting with us, they're still interacting with us. They're
mhm,
still fricking speaking English. So, why are they doing that? Or they're speaking Spanish or they're speaking German, whatever they're speaking, right? Why are they communicating with us if they're not us? You can't have you can't have a linguistic communication unless you're speaking to your own species. And so so the question, the metaphysical or the ontological question becomes for me, to what extent is this us and to what extent is this not us?
mhm.
And I think that's an open question, John, because even, even take Stewart's mantis experience or Karen's AI bug on her chest, it's still Stewart and Karen telling me that. It's still them telling me the story. It's John telling me the story of him visiting the future.
Mhm,
It's John Price telling me the whatever the story. So at the and you asked me what shocks me. Well, what shocks me is, again, when it's not us, when there's something physical appearing and intervening into our space. But even then, it still might be us as some future descendant.
mhm. It's radical. Yeah, that is the moment when I start to I have this thing I've gotta add because you haven't mentioned this story yet, and I think the name is Kevin, but forgive me if that's wrong.
Kevin, yeah, Kevin Cans.
Is Kevin the story in your book where he ends up doing some almost like ancient magic work with inner figures and then something appears? Was that the
Yeah, he
Yeah.
materializes a gigantic triangular UFO
As
and his
one does. Okay, wait, here, I'm gonna let's give that story because it's way up in my mind, and I gotta do some exploration of this because it really, that was it because it just personally speaking, I get very excited when we bridge together this kind of orientation that you're proposing and also what we could call magic, the practice of magic, and so pulling those together in that story was extremely interesting.
so first of all, he wasn't named in the book by his own choice, and he's come out since. His name's Kevin Can is his name, Cann.
How did I know his name? That was weird.
I teach with Kevin. We're gonna teach at
That's
Essence.
weird. Okay. That's
So
very odd.
Kevin's autistic by
Mhm,
his own diagnosis and by his own language. I adore Kevin Can. I think he's profound.
mhm,
This chapter's called "That They Are Not Human" or "They Are Not Human." And Kevin has taught me a lot about particularly autism and our notions of the human,
mhm,
and he has this teaching he calls Platonic surrealism. And Platonic surrealism is basically that awareness or what we think of as the imagination can manifest itself in physical reality, that everything that exists, even physically, is ultimately imagined. So it's a form of, I don't want to call it idealism, but I think that's how
mhm,
it would be framed philosophically. I think it's a lot richer than that and a lot more ancient than that. And this manifesting of the UFO over his backyard, what you haven't told our listeners is that Kevin was in extreme trauma and suffering at this point of his life. So there's something about trauma and suffering that's integral to these manifestations for Kevin and also for me. I call it the traumatic secret.
mhm,
And he doesn't you don't want to materialize a gigantic triangular UFO over your backyard, by the way. You don't wanna do that. You don't wanna suffer. And he materialized a demon before this event. So but again, it speaks to this power of awareness or something deep in the human that can produce surreally, in an absurd but a powerful way, what itself is expressing. And it's not about consciousness, it's not about ego, it's not about this atomic individual that I keep criticizing. It's about some greater form of mind or awareness that is at the root of Kevin's teaching. And he comes out Kevin comes out I mean, I know a lot about Kevin's a dear friend. Kevin comes out of he grew up in Minnesota. He's a year older than I am, so we kinda grew up in the same cultural moment. He grew up in a was trained really in a movement that emphasized subtle energies and the body
Mhm.
embodiment. So he had these occult or metaphysical or esoteric experiences from the time he was young. But he also just had the shit beat out of him because he was autistic, and we didn't
Mm.
culture didn't understand autism, in the 1960s and 1970s, and so he suffered with that his whole life as well. But yes, what we think of as magic is basically the power of the mind over material reality. It's the
Mhm.
mind to manifest material reality, and this shows up in spades, as it were, in Kevin's teachings and in his life.
Well, it certainly opens. I mean, this one scene, I think between the mantis and Kevin's experience of a funny, a humor induced, an intentionally funny triangular UFO in
Which,
his backyard.
by the way, we include the drawing. I mean, Kevin drew it. I mean, it's like a freaking image of
Yeah,
the UFO
yeah.
in the book. I mean, come on, it's like it's
It's great. It's great. And again, like that's one thing that I always just to kind of again, you given what you have been so interested in for so many years, reading your work to me sets this up because there's this. I know I'm getting into the fact that my worldviews are going to be challenged when I read your work, and so then all of a sudden they become a little bit more gentle. There's a lighter. I hold them a little lighter, and it opens something up in me. And back to that forgetting piece is that I've got the veil is thin for a couple of weeks. It's like a psychedelic experience. I'm like, holy shit, weird things can happen. And then I get back into my routines and do all my stuff, and I'm like, I got to go back to Jeff. I got to drink from this well.
yeah. Okay. So I get that a lot, by the way.
I'm sure. I'm
Yeah, yeah.
sure.
A lot of readers. I mean, I get emails, things like, "You showed up in my dreams last night,"
Yeah.
and what you said, and or "You stood over my bed, and my wife and I both." Yeah. I'm like,
Hey.
first of all, dude, that is creepy. That is really creepy. I and second of all, I have no memory of that. But I think it's you.
Yeah.
I think you're the one who opened up, as it were, and the it becomes more porous and the veil
Mhm.
becomes thin, as it were. And so I really do think that. I think these are the super readers of my work, that they are open to these states, and then so these states happen to them. And of course, you're such a reader. You
Mhm.
have these, as it's often observed, if you read and think about synchronicity, a lot of synchronicities start to
Yeah.
happen.
Yes, absolutely.
And so I do think there's this materialization going on.
Mhm.
There's a kind of
Mhm.
magical element to the writing and the reading, and this, of course, I've written a lot about because I do think there's a kind of reading and there's a kind of writing that does materialize itself.
Well, again, to me, it feels like it's magic. It I
Yeah.
don't
Well,
I
it
don't
is.
mean
It
that
is.
word from the way that we've understood the word.
It
And
is.
I think we're working with linguistic structures that are kind of as material as they can be, and they reference inner landscapes if we make the inner outer distinctions, and it shifts things around and opens us up in meaningful ways. I do. I think like literature is magic.
Of course it is.
It's awesome.
It can be,
Yeah, it
in the
can be.
right hands and with the right writers and with the right readers. Of course, sometimes it's just reading a cereal box or a
Yeah,
stop sign, you know,
information.
but
Yeah.
sometimes, whoa, sometimes the writer sees the character or meets the character in real life. I mean, there's some kind of precognitive inspiration that's going on, that is really amazing, and I'm here referencing Eric Wargo, whom I think you
Mhm.
know Eric,
You and I have talked about getting connected with him at some point.
but
Yeah.
he writes a lot about the precognitions. He calls writers precogs hooked up to printers. I love that. I love that
Yeah.
phrase, and the reason he uses that is like, what's he thinks precognition is omnipresent, it's in everybody's life.
Mhm.
What is astonishing about writers is that they just they write everything down, and so you can trace precognition. That's why he calls them precogs hooked up to printers because they are.
That's
They're
cute.
they're literally sometimes hooked up to a printer, and
Well, so I wanna jump into this because your work is, of course, working with reframing, connecting with paranormal phenomena. As invitations into a new way of being, and in my own work, I'm trying to cultivate practices that help people live differently. So
right.
my book is certainly looking at what I
You have it harder, John.
yeah, yeah. I don't know, man. I don't know. What I'm doing in my work is really trying to give people what I think are some of the fundamental elements of religious, like spiritual, we could say spiritual training. You know, for example, the four levels of interpretation and reality, that there are elements that there are ways that we can learn to practice to be
Yeah.
open to these experiences. And so essentially, that's the kind of I am a it's int I like, I thought of experimental psychology versus psychotherapy in my training early on, where we had people that were studying phenomena, and then there were people that were working knee to knee and applying those studied phenomena to the healing dynamics in relationship. And so I certainly think that's been one of my orientations for 20 years now. So
That same distinction, it's in physics too, by the way. You know, there's theoretical physics and then there's engineering, and they're 2 very different, things. You know, the theoreticians just go off on the math, and the engineers are like, "Yeah, but
yeah, how the hell
we've
did we
gotta
get this?
build the thing," you know, I mean, come on, I mean, let's build the ship or build the
Yes.
plane, as it were, let's not just do the theoretical physics. So, yeah,
So
both are true.
So I'm trying to relate to reality through ritual, symbolic literacy, and certainly I know I'm going to use a word you don't like, orientation to mystery, or I could say orientation to the unknown, and having the unknown be a practice, right?
Yeah,
Unknowing. So
yeah.
how do you see the relationship between the experience of the impossible and the practice of the impossible?
Well, it's super important. I just it's just not what I do. It's like there's only so many hours in the day, and I just people are like, "Okay, so how do we do this, Jeff?" Like, "I don't know. I don't
Go
know.
figure it out,
Just
motherfucker.
go
Come
do it. Just
on.
go do it. You're the one who's start the church or the
Yeah.
community and be the psychotherapist. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know,
Yeah.
So I say that with humor, but I also say that honestly.
Yeah.
I'm not I'm not very good at coming up with those practices.
Mm.
And, another way to say this is this is an Esalen story, but years ago, they're no longer there, but people used to ask me all the time what my practice is.
Yeah.
And what they wanted to hear was some kind of yoga or some kind of
Yeah. How do
meditation.
I do this? I mean, how do I duplicate? Yeah.
Well, what I always said was, "Oh, that's easy. It's reading and writing."
Mm.
And I they were disgusted by that, by the way.
I love
Um,
that.
but I'm serious.
Yeah. I love that.
That's and what I do, every morning, I get up and I write, and the reason
Mm.
I write is those texts and those books will be working with people like yourself for hopefully decades long after I'm gone, and they work all around the world. I mean, I know they do because I get correspondence from people all around the world. I mean, I see it. I see it now. So I know that what I do as a writer is far more important than what I can do as, teaching somebody to do something, which I don't know how, by the way, John. So I'm really good at teaching people how to think about it, but I'm really bad at teaching people how to do it, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, yes, let's I that is my I mean, I've been writing this book for 2 years now, and I'm almost finished. I've got 3 more chapters, and I'm gonna try to throw my hat in the ring there and talk about because I do think that the practice is the not forgetting. You know, that whether and this is very Jungian, I have a dream, and I can just have a dream, or I can have a dream and I can write that dream down, and then I can share it with a friend, and then I can change the way I live a little bit every day in relationship to that experience.
So let me put that in terms of religion. The myth needs the ritual.
Yes. Yeah.
You have to reenact the story over and over again, but you also need to build the building, by the way, the
Yeah.
architecture and
Yeah.
art
And community and
and the
food and
community. I mean, come on, you gotta do the
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of wisdom in that, and
Mhm.
but again, my attitude is very practical. It's just, "Okay, well, this is what I do in the world." It's
Yeah,
not everything, it's not sufficient, but
right.
I can do this. I'll do this, you know?
Glad you do. So, this gets to something really interesting about let me put my psychotherapy hat on for a moment. Because you've shown that thinking impossibly is less about knowing what's real and more about opening to what exceeds our categories. But in psychotherapy and healing, I bump against this temptation all the time, so do we all, to make claims about reality that are more certain. And so how do you help people discern between the imagination as this exotic and wild force and also this the imagination as pick this apart delusion or neuroticism. Like Jung makes this distinction between authentic and neurotic suffering. And I would define that on one level as authentic suffering is actually in the flow of reality, right? Like if I have an experience, I have an experience. I'm not trying to deny it. If I try to deny that experience, I'm caught by neurotic suffering. So what's the line between liberating the mind and losing it?
I don't know if there is one.
Mhm.
You know, one of the reasons that I focus so much on affirming people's experiences and I don't talk about the frauds and the delusions is that the culture is always talking about the frauds and the delusions.
Mhm.
It does. And so I wanted and I learned this at Esalen, by the way. I learned that if you invite a debunker, for example, into the conversation, they will shut the conversation down. That's the whole raison d'etre of debunking, by the way, is to stop the conversation. Now they may not know that. I'm not saying they're bad people. I adore skeptics just like I adore other people, but the debunking
Mhm.
strategy is to shut the conversation down. I wanna have the conversation. So, I wanna start with, "Of course these things happen.
Mhm.
Hey, let's go from there." And I think you get a lot further into the conversation that way than just, "Is it real or is it not real?" Oh my god, that is so boring, and it's like, I can just predict, I can tell you what I can just tell you right away what they're gonna say. Then let me trouble that, I'll trouble that further. What people we have this thing in the humanities called mad studies, and we have people doing the philosophy of psychosis. And essentially what
Mhm.
saying is that, well, maybe psychosis, maybe what we think of as mental illness also opens people up. Maybe these are people that can't deal and they're often themselves, by the way. So they're speaking out of personal experience. Maybe these altered states give real philosophical insight into the nature of reality, and they're part of psychosis or mental illness. Why can't they both be true?
I think that because we have such a resistant framework to what we call psychosis, we have no framework to experience these states of conscious so they become psychotic as
Yeah.
opposed to, hey, if we actually allowed room for these wild and exotic states and we didn't debunk them so quickly and create a total social anxiety and shame and all the shit that inevitably happens to us, maybe we'd have a chance at actually exploring what's coming up.
Well, I think so, just historically, even, Plato said things like the gifts of madness,
Yeah.
the divine gifts of madness. Now there are other forms of madness that are really destructive and bad, but there are other forms of madness that really give gifts and really give philosophical wisdom, and so it's just and I'm thinking here of, like, somebody like my Philip K. Dick, who's a hero of mine.
Mhm.
Know, Dick was a science fiction writer, but he also suffered tremendously and was himself mentally instituted for a while, put in a mental institution.
Mhm.
He understood very clearly he called schizophrenia, by the way, the step ahead that didn't work or something like that. That
Interesting.
there's
Yeah.
some kind of evolutionary push and it ends up not working. It ends up actually destabilizing or even destroying the person, but it's also a step forward,
Mhm.
you know? So it's a step forward that's a step backwards as well, as it were. And Dick is speaking out of his own experience. He's not just psychologizing other people. He's like thinking about his own altered states and his own self, you know?
Well, it bring
It's a beautiful essay, by the way. I can't think of what it's called, but it's a beautiful essay.
it makes me think of I just immediately went to a friend of mine in Jamaica, and we were doing a retreat out there, and he's local fellow, grew up there in 9 Mile, and he said to me, "I don't know the verifiable objective truth of this, but I certainly think it's true on many levels." He said, "You know, when we were colonized, it said that the first 3 buildings they built were a prison,
Yeah,
a mental institution, and a church."
yeah.
And I thought, "Oh, that doesn't tell you a lot about how we function." You know? Okay, so I know we gotta start kinda wrapping things up. We've got a bit of time left. You work with students every day. I'm curious
Every day
again
that
about
I teach
every
anyway.
day you teach, yes. How do you help them? What do you notice about helping them begin to think impossibly?
So, I mean, it depends on if the students are young or if they're
Mhm,
adults. It's totally different. You know, the adult students are they've been pushed around and they've been opened up and life has happened, as you know.
mhm,
They're in their second half of life and they're in a very different place. The students who I get in the classroom at Rice, you know, the undergraduates, you know, they're 18 to 22, and they're at a very different
mhm,
moment in the life cycle in which is really interesting, though. They have separated from their families
mhm,
just by virtue of going to college. I mean, it's not like they've existentially separated, but they also have questions. They have serious questions about their life worlds and about their family cultures, whatever their family cultures are. And so what teaching is for me is helping them to articulate their own questions.
mhm,
I'm not there as I tell them this all the time. I am not there to give you your answers, right? I'm not here to impose my will on a student body. I'm not grading you for your belief system or your worldview. What I want to do is give you new words and give you new models to help you articulate the questions you already have. And they're generally very grateful for that, but that requires me I spend really the first 2 weeks just what I call breaking transferences. It's a very psychoanalytic thing. But I just wanna break them,
yeah,
and because they're destructive, John, as you know as a therapist. The kids are projecting onto me, they're like, "Oh, this is our priest or our rabbi or,
mhm,
you know, our religious leader or whatever, and religion is about making you more religious," and I'm like, "I am not that. That is not what this class is." And so the whole tenor of the class for the first 2 weeks is just really what the study of religion is not. And
mhm,
then, of course, we get into what it is, and but they're generally very comfortable with that, and the other thing I tell them constantly is, "Look, some of you are gonna have trouble with this, and here's why." And so when a student comes to me, it's usually 3 or 4 2 or 3 months into the class, and they're complaining about the class or the material. I'm like, "What did I tell you, you know, the first week of class?" "Well, you said blah, blah, blah." I'm like, "Yeah, I did." And so they're like, "Yeah, you were right." And so it was like, and again, it's not me being right about their worldview, about the nature of God or ultimate reality anymore. It's just I want them to struggle with the study of religion
mhm,
like they struggle, you know, with the history of literature, the history of politics, or the history of physics, or whatever it is. So that's my pedagogy, John, is what I'm trying to say. And I do think it's psychotherapeutic, by the way, but
mhm,
I'm not a therapist, obviously, and I have to be very conscientious and careful about what I do in the classroom and what I don't do. And by the way, I also bring experiencers in the classroom,
ah, wow,
which generally blows them away
sure,
because they just think, "Oh, Dr. Kripal is making this shit up." You know? He's just talking out of his head, you know, or whatever. I won't use any other body part, but, uh, and then, you know, Karen comes in or something, Karen Austin comes in and tells them about the bug on her chest, and they're like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa." You're like, "Whoa." It's just like just really shocks them that adults can talk about these experiences in a very sophisticated way, a very thoughtful way, and that actually really helps. And it's Elizabeth Crone comes in and talks about
Mhm.
struck by lightning, and I have people come in and talk about Christianity and Islam and Judaism and Buddhism and Hinduism, and we have astronauts come in and a famous movie actress once, and,
Wow.
I just wanna bring people in and show them I want people just to talk and talk honestly about these things.
So you and I thank you. You and I
That
share obviously a lineage of thinkers, mystics, healers, and on some level trying to bring forgotten or forbidden ways of knowing back into culture. And so if you can think 100 years in the future, what impossible truth or practice do you hope will become?
well, I wrote a little essay once on the future, and
Mhm.
I, of course, don't know what the future will bring, but I hope it's something like Esalen, by the way. This notion of the spiritual but not religious that the young people articulated, that demographic, I do think that's really a healthy, politically and ethically savvy way to go, and I'm not afraid to say that. I really think that, John, and I'll articulate why I think that. I do think that. So my hope, I don't, my hope in the future is that we can essentially hold our dogmas lightly and move into a worldview which we recognize that other people have other worldviews and that we're spiritual, but we're not religious. Really, I really think that.
Thank you. Okay, so as far as opportunities for people to get connected to you, where do you want to point people?
Well, if somebody's interested, I am teaching a class with Kevin Can in December. And we have an amazing teaching assistant named Joshua Cutchin who's joining us, and you can go online, you can go to Esalen and do that, and in terms of the books, if you just wanna read a book, the one book I always suggest strongly is Secret Body,
Uh-huh.
and the reason I suggest it,
Fantastic.
it's a memoir, and
Yeah, it's
it talks about
fantastic.
all the
Whoa.
other books, and then you can figure out the reader can figure out what book to focus on if they start with that book. But you can get all the books on Amazon or any other bookstore that you go to.
And I'll have your website listed and it's
Yeah.
so is there anything else in conclusion that we're leaving out that needs to be kind of hanging out in
We're
the back
leaving out
burner?
a lot of stuff that
Of course, is there anything that you think you need to tug on? No.
no, we're doing something called the Center of the Impossible at Rice, which is based on my Archives of the Impossible idea, and involves physical archives and around these impossible moments, and we have conferences every couple of years on that, and that's something to look for. We don't have one this next year for just staff reasons, but that's something to really keep your eye on, I think.
Okay, well, everybody look in the liner notes and descriptions, and I'll point you to more Jeff Kripal. And Jeff, I look forward. This is our fifth interview. I look forward to the 10th, whenever that happens in the next 10 years. Thank
All
you
right.
for being here.
All right. Thanks, John.